Welcome to our show, Hack the Planet. Hack the Planet!
Alright, as per
Are
usual,
we fashionably late?
I am fashionably late. But I feel confident about, I did feel confident right up until I started speaking and stumbling over my words. But I do feel confident about today's stream. Insofar as I think at this point we've made all the mistakes that we can possibly make, and I think things are going to go smoothly from here on out. I don't think we can make any new mistakes. Certainly. Alright, so last time we did use of alternate authentication material, I believe. Yeah, Kerberos and pass the ticket and pass the hash. We did a pass the hash attack. So today we're on abusing user behavior. And if I recall correctly, this one is pretty easy. I think we're hijacking an RDP session in this one. No, we're backdooring scripts. Alright, so I think we can get through 6 and 7 and 8, of course. And that'll be a good stopping point. We'll finish up all of lateral movement. And from here on out, I'm not going to wait for the weekends. Every day at 8, I'm going to live stream until compromising Active Directory is completely done and over with. So tune in every night at 8 or thereabouts, because again, I'm going to be fashionably late. And we'll finally complete compromising Active Directory. All right. So here's where I bring my super duper high-tech, super automated touch portal stream deck into play. And I'm going to have the robot read. Hopefully. Sometimes this doesn't play into my monitor, but we'll see.
Under certain circumstances, an attacker can take advantage of actions performed by users to gain further access to machines in the network. While there are many ways this can happen, we will look at some of the most common ones. Abusing writable shares. It is quite common to find network shares that legitimate users use to perform day-to-day tasks when checking corporate environments. If those shares are writable for some reason, an attacker can plant specific files to force users into executing any arbitrary payload and gain access to their machines. One common scenario consists of finding a shortcut to a script or executable file hosted on a network share. PuTTY LNK file. The rationale behind this is that the administrator can maintain an executable on a network share, and users can execute it without copying or installing the application to each user's machine. If we, as attackers, have write permissions over such scripts or executables, we can backdoor them to force users to execute any payload we want.
I wonder exactly how common this is in pen testing. I wonder if they would... It seems like a lot of times if there's any rules against like phishing campaigns or social engineering, this almost, I guess it wouldn't fall under that category, but it seems like it's getting kind of close.
Although the script or executable is hosted on a server, when a user opens the shortcut on his workstation, the executable will be copied from the server to its %temp% folder and executed on the workstation. Therefore, any payload will run in the context of the final user's workstation and logged-in user account. Backdooring.VBS scripts. As an example, if the shared resource is a VBS script, we can put a copy of nc64.exe on the same share and inject the following code in the shared script. Backdooring.exe files. If the shared file is a Windows binary, say putty.exe, you can download it from the...
So I must have skipped having the robot read this section, but this will copy nc64.exe from the share to the user's workstation temp directory and send a reverse shell back to the attacker whenever a user opens the shared VBS script.
Share and use Venom to inject a backdoor into it. The binary will still work as usual, but execute an additional payload silently. To create a backdoored putty.exe, we can use the following command. The resulting puttyx.exe will execute a reverse_TCP interpreter payload without the user noticing it. Once the file has been generated, we can replace the executable on the Windows share and wait for any connections using the exploit/multi/handler module from Metasploit. RDP hijacking. When an administrator uses remote desktop to connect to a machine and closes the RDP client instead of logging off, his session will remain open on the server indefinitely. If you have system privileges on Windows Server 2016 and earlier, you can take over any existing RDP session without requiring a password. If we have administrator level access, we can get system by any method of our preference. For now, we will be using SecSec to do so.
That sounds like something I would do. I would close a session instead of logging off. In fact, I do that all the time.
First, let's run a command exe as administrator. Run as administrator. From there, run psexec64.exe, available at c:\tools/. To list the existing sessions on a server, you can use the following command. According to the command output above, if we were currently connected via RDP using the administrator user, our session name would be rdptcp #6. We can also see that a user named Luke has left a session open with ID 3. Any session with a disk state has been left open by the user and isn't being used at the moment. While you can take over active sessions as well, the legitimate user will be forced out of his session when you do, which could be noticed by them. To connect to a session, we will use scan.exe and specify the session ID we will be taking over, as well as our current session name. Following the previous example, to take over Luke's session if we were connected as the administrator user, we'd use the following command. In simple terms, the command states that the graphical session 3 owned by Luke should be connected with the RDP session rdptcp #6 owned by the administrator user. As a result, we'll resume Luke's RDP session and connect to it immediately. Note, Windows Server 2019 won't allow you to connect to another user's session without knowing its password. Let's get to work. To complete this exercise, you will need to connect to THMJ.
I wonder if that's 2019 and forward. I would imagine so, right? But they should mention
MP2 using a new set of credentials obtained from http://distributor.za.tryhackme.
All right, I'm going to pause there because for that to work, we have to connect in all the various ways. So let's go to access. And we learned last time that it's important to not just regenerate the OVPN config file, but also refresh the page. It seems like it has made a difference in at least one session, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure to do that every time I want to reconnect to the network. And as per usual, we're going to go in here and rename this to letmove2. Notice I'm using a new terminal, which I quite like, and I forget its name, but I hope to have at least a short on the subject. So let's see here. What do we have to do? CD downloads and sudo and it suggests our last OVPN config file. And now we have the new one. Let's see here. Initialization sequence completed. It bugs me a little bit that this isn't all the way down. I think for that to happen, we have to get rid of the menu bar though, which I'm not super comfortable with yet. Okay, but let's see if I can remember some of the hotkeys. I might be able to get away without the menu bar. It says it will kill it, but I've tried this before and it doesn't seem to actually do that. So we still have our OVPN connection. We should at least. I mean, we can check the status. I forget how, but let's just go ahead and connect to the network and then check everything out afterwards. Let me know how my levels are. All right. Resolve. You take 1 day off and forget everything. I think this is our... Why am I looking up here? I think this is our... Yep, still 48. Excuse me. That 101. And enter and password and resolve, control arrow, domain arrow, password, and control arrow, and status, and arrow. And it looks like it worked, but the surefire way of figuring out if it worked is if we can get credentials. Let's see if we can... Let's try, okay. So refreshing it gets us new credentials, and so does get credentials. So it looks like DNS is working for a change. All right, let's jump out of there and CD, let's go up, CD, try hack me lateral movement. It has memorized this directory because we haven't left in about a month, which is a little concerning. Let's nano creds. Oh, you know what? I have a different, I think it's creds 2 for creds T2. So is this tier 2 administrators? Yes. All right, so nano creds 2 T2. Huh, and there's nothing in here. Why? All right, first time for everything. Did that save? And Control Shift T gives us a new terminal window. And what do we have to do? We have to SSH in with this, right? No, we want to connect via RDP. All right, so here we go, and we have to, oh, I learned a new trick. Alt backspace will delete one word at a time. So that's interesting. And then also Alt B will move you back one word at a time without deleting it. So that's good to know. It's a little bit more efficient. Let's rename this. We just double click. In this terminal, you just double click to rename, which is a nice feature because previously if you right clicked it, renaming it was real close to closing out the window. So that got me in trouble a lot of the time. And we were here for a reason. Jasmine Stanley. And always Control Shift C or use the right click so that you don't get in trouble. And now /P. Is there a space there? /P. What was our password? I probably wouldn't have remembered that. All right. No. And we're getting there. Slowly but surely. All right. Are we in? How do I, okay, this is a new terminal view. Maybe I can make the font a little. And now it's not the entire. All right. Okay, so we're on the desktop. These credentials. Oh, let's go to our robot.
com/creds_T2. Notice that this link is different from the other tasks. Once you have your credentials, connect to THMJMP2 via RDP.
We're here.
Spreerd/v thmjmp2.ca.tryhack.com/u your underscore user /p your underscore password. These credentials will grant you administrative access to THMJMP2. For this task, we'll work on hijacking an RDP session. If you are interested in trying backdooring exe or other files, you can find some exercises about this in the Windows Local Persistence Room. Follow the instructions to hijack t1_toby.bex RDP session on thmjmp2 to get your flag. Note, when executing query session, you'll see several users named t1_toby.beck followed by a number. These are just identical copies of the same user, and you can hijack any of them, you don't need to hijack them all. Make sure you hijack a session marked as disconnected, disk, to avoid interfering with other users.
Make sure you hijack a session marked as disk. Okay, to avoid it. Yeah, all right. Because that will log them out of their session. But won't they be interfering with us? I think. Anyways, so this is a pretty short task. I like these later tasks in that they're kind of not holding your hand just a little less, or they're holding your hand a little less because the information is kind of scattered throughout. And you have to synthesize it for yourself rather than, do it step by step. I mean, not really. You can see here that we can find the tools here. So, C tools, run it as is. Okay, so that's what we're going to do first thing first. No results for COMM, but COMMAND, that turns up. Oh, Windows, never change. All right, so I think we're just going to use the same creds as before, right? Nope. Well, let's paste that here while we're here. Control Shift C. Haha. I've outwitted my computer again. Oh my god, just all of it. Thank you. All right. Yeah, and I gave you whoa, that is not the same as what let's just use right click from now on, shall we? That seems a bit more reliable. Why is this not working? Enter an admin username and password. Well, this is tier 2, right? Oh, we're not in the right credentials page, I don't think. I think that's left over from our previous session. Excuse me. Ah. All right. So this should be more successful. Will Control U work? No. Control K? Control K works. Hey, I'm learning. I'm applying knowledge. Now, I wonder, since we didn't start the RDP session with a tier 2 administrator credentials, is that going to be an issue? I wonder if we should just start all over, cut our losses. I think we can get away without that menu bar. But why is this still not full size here? This is going to drive me nutty. Okay, I'm gonna try to get through the live stream without worrying about it, but as soon as the live stream is over, I'm gonna dedicate however long it takes to getting the window to be the appropriate size. It's like a splinter in my brain. No, come on. All right. Control Shift C. Control Shift V. Yay, I did it. Control Shift C. Control Shift V. All right. I'm in. Now we have to run the, again, I don't know if this is going to work since our RDP session is not elevated. We'll soon find out. All right, so now we have to change to Ender, not LS. Everything's slightly off brand in Windows. Alright, so right clicking just pastes. I agree. I was thinking I'd get this sort of thing, but again, I think that's probably because we don't. It's not an elevated RDP session, maybe? I don't know. I mean, we can try again, but okay, let's just get the wrong. I'm gonna try this one more time. What? Yes, it is. It's recognized. I recognize it. I recognize it from right over there on the left-hand side of the screen. Oh, we're no longer in the correct directory. I vaguely remember this happening last time. Do I have to... I do not remember... Is this... Which program is this that I have to accept the EULA for? Oh my god, this is the worst. PSEC. Okay. Exited on THM jump to with error code 0. I'm gonna try restarting this and run the RDP with elevated credentials. Oh, I should be using my new trick, which is Alt backspace, which deletes one word at a time. So I don't have to hammer on backspace. Control Shift C, I'm learning. Control Shift V. And then password, right? Is that the command? This is further down. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. All right, we just need the Vivian 2008. And now we have the elevated credentials, I believe. And for those of you just joining us, what I did incorrectly this time around was that the creds page that I had was open from the previous session. This is a new one, creds T2. So this gives us the username and passwords of tier 2 administrators. And we're going to run this as administrator. And change directory C tools. Do I need a? I don't. All right. So hopefully when we run this new command, we won't get any nonsense. We won't get any talkback, any sass from the computer. It's not giving us any nonsense about the EULA. What did it? It warned us something about query user, didn't it? You'll see several names. Okay. All right, so this one is active. We don't want that one. Oh, that's us. We're active. And disk is short for disconnected, so we can use any of these Toby Beck names, I think, here. All right, so there's no session name. Oh, no. But I think we do need the ID. Take over Luke's session. If we were connected, we'd use the following command to scan 3 desktop and then the session name. Let's get to work. Hijack Toby Beck's RDP session to get your flag. All right. Good. We just need the ID. In simple terms, the command states that the graphical session 3 owned by Luke should be connected with the RDP session, RDP TCP number 6 owned by the administrator user. As a result, we'll resume Luke's RDP session and connect to it immediately. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. All right. So I think we're just going to plug in our own parameters here that we see. And we can use any Toby Beck session, it's my understanding. But I'm going to use ID 3 and destination RDP TCP number 52. All right, so this was one of the easier tasks. Even I couldn't screw it up that badly. I mean, I did use the incorrect credentials at one point, but we got through that pretty quickly. So let's see here. And did we get it? We did, and that gets a...
Hack the planet! Hack the planet! Shut up and get in the car!
Hack the planet. And also, shut up and get in the car. Alright. Super easy there. Again, there's not much we haven't screwed up at this point, and so... Oh, this one is a little trickier, though. I recognize this one. This one's a little bit nastier. Not going to be as nice. Alright. Robots. Take it away.
Most of the lateral movement techniques we have presented require specific ports to be available for an attacker. In real-world networks, the administrators may have blocked some of these ports for security reasons or have implemented segmentation around the network, preventing you from reaching SMB, RDP, WinRM, or RPC ports. To go around these restrictions, we can use port forwarding techniques, which consist of using any compromised host as a jump box to pivot to other hosts. It is expected that some machines will have more network permissions than others, as every role in a business will have different needs in terms of what network services are required for day-to-day work. SSH tunneling. The first protocol we'll be looking at is SSH, as it already has built-in functionality to do port forwarding through a feature called SSH tunneling. While SSH used to be a protocol associated with Linux systems, Windows now ships with the Open SSH client by default, so you can expect to find it in many systems nowadays, independent of their operating system. SSH tunneling can be used in different ways to forward ports through an SSH connection, which we'll use depending on the situation. To explain each case, let's assume a scenario where we've gained control over the PC1 machine. It doesn't need to be administrator access, and would like to use it as a pivot to access a port on another machine to which we can't directly connect. We will start a tunnel from the PC1 machine, acting as an SSH client, to the attacker's PC, which will act as an SSH server. The reason to do so is that you'll often find an SSH client on Windows machines, but no SSH server will be available most of the time. SSH tunnel. Since we'll be making a connection back to our attacker's machine, we'll want to create a user in it without access to any console for tunneling and set a password to use for creating the tunnels.
Alright, let me pause it right there and check my notes. I think I have notes on this. So, in doing this, I've prepared for these live streams now. In preparing for this one, I learned a bunch of new command line commands. Sudo system ctl start SSH. We'll start SSH. We're going to find that when we try to tunnel back to our attacker machine, that SSH isn't working. So we got to start it, or it shouldn't be working. The default is for it to not be enabled. So I did enable it at one point. I don't know what we'll encounter this time around. And then add username and password username. So to add a user and to prompt a password change for the user. grep username will allow us to search for a user. You're probably familiar with grep. User delete, username delete user, and I'm probably going to do that. Let me do that right now. First, let's see some of these commands in action. So this task requires we create a username tunnel user. Grep, and I think we got to do the quotes, right? The single quotes. I think it's doing something. Well, that's going on. Let's see. Where are the users usually? Okay. So I think what I want to do is specify the directory. Oh my god. etc password is where they're kept. Okay, so we do have tunnel user already created, but let's delete it and pretend that we haven't created it yet. And we'll only do that when we get there. And now let's grep once again. And he doesn't seem to be there. Alright, so when we get to that point, we'll create tunnel user. And I don't think this is the point at which we want to do it, even though it's mentioning it here. I think it explicitly tells us to do that later on in the Let's Get to Work section. I'm hoping. Let's see. Proxy chains, tunneling complex exploits. This is a... they're following up an easy task with a far more complex task. Where's the Let's Get to Work section? Oh, okay, so we come across it. Okay, we'll create tunnel user there. Holy cow, this is a long... I think we were right about here. Alright, ready? Here we go.
Depending on your needs, the SSH tunnel can be used to do either local or remote port forwarding. Let's take a look at each case. SSH remote port forwarding. In our example, let's assume that firewall policies block the attacker's machine from directly accessing port 3389 on the server. If the attacker has previously compromised PC1 and, in turn, PC1 has access to port 3389 of the server, it can be used to pivot to port 3389 using remote port forwarding from PC1.
Inference.
Remote port forwarding allows you to take a reachable port from the SSH client, in this case, PC1, and project it into a remote SSH server, the attacker's machine. As a result, a port will be opened in the attacker's machine that can be used to connect back to port 3389 in the server through the SSH tunnel. PC1 will, in turn, proxy the connection so that the server will see all the traffic as if it was coming from PC1. SSH remote port forwarding. A valid question that might pop up by this point is why we need port forwarding if we have compromised PC1 and can run an RDP session directly from there. The answer is simple. In a situation where we only have console access to PC1, we won't be able to use any RDP client as we don't have a GUI. By making the port available to your attacker's machine, you can use a Linux RDP client to connect. Similar situations arise when you want to run an exploit against a port that can't be reached directly, as your exploit may require a specific scripting language that may not always be available at machines you compromise along the way. Referring to the previous image, to forward port 3389 on the server back to our attacker's machine, we can use the following command on PC1. This will establish an SSH session from PC1 to 1. I
think what I'm going to do in upcoming streams is have chat educate me a little better on just exactly what all these commands are comprised of. So I think this is the in and the out ports, but I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I know they're ports. I think this specifies which one comes in and which one goes out. But your guess is as good as mine at this point.
1.1.1 Attacker PC using the tunnel user. Since the tunnel user isn't allowed to run a shell on the attacker PC, we need to run the SSH command with the end switch to prevent the client from requesting one, or the connection will exit immediately. The R switch is used to request a remote port forward, and the syntax requires us first to indicate the port we will be opening at the SSH server, 3389, followed by a colon, and then the IP and port of the socket will be forwarded.
Okay, so they do a pretty good job of explaining it here. The first 3389 is the port will be opening at the SSH server, and then the port of the socket will be forwarding. All right, so notice that the port numbers don't need to match, although they do in this example. Oh my god, this is why I have the robot read these things.
Forwarding 3.3.3.3:3389. Notice that the port numbers don't need to match, although they do in this example. The command itself won't output anything, but the tunnel will depend on the command to be running. Whenever we want, we can close the tunnel by pressing Ctrl+C as with any other command. Once our tunnel is set and running, we can go to the attacker's machine and RDP into the forwarded port to reach the server. SSH local port forwarding. Local port forwarding allows us to pull a port from an SSH server into the SSH client. In our scenario, this could be used to take any service available in our attacker's machine and make it available through a port on PC1. That way, any host that can't connect directly to the attacker's PC but can connect to PC1 will now be able to reach the attacker's services through the pivot host. Using this type of port forwarding would allow us to run reverse shells from hosts that normally wouldn't be able to connect back to us, or simply make any service we want available to machines that have no direct connection to us. SSH local port forwarding. To forward port 80 from the attacker's machine and make it available from PC1, we can run the following command on PC1. The command structure is similar to the one used in remote port forwarding, but uses the L option.
This is one thing, if you're ever trying to instruct class on coding or just about anything, you want to separate the names. So they say that these ports don't need to match. Well, then don't. I mean, if you're teaching it, it's like naming your variable. It gets kind of confusing when everything is the same, even though they are and can be distinct. Like, you know, if you want to refer to the port that's being opened on the server, 79 is the port, you know. That way, when you're saying 80, you know exactly whether you're specifying the port that's being opened on the server or the one that's being forwarded. You know what I'm saying? It's just better practice that way to name everything uniquely.
For local port forwarding. This option requires us to indicate the local socket used by PC1 to receive connections, *80, and the remote socket to connect to from the attacker's PC perspective, 127.0.0.1:80. Notice that we use the IP address 127.0.0.1 in the second socket, as from the attacker's PC perspective. That's the host that holds the port 80 to be forwarded.
That I don't quite get.
Since we are opening a new port on PC1, we might need to add a firewall rule to allow for incoming connections, with dir equals in. Administrative privileges are needed for this. Once your tunnel is set up, any user pointing their browsers to PC1 at http://2.2.2.2:80 and see the website published by the attacker's machine. Port forwarding with SOCAT. In situations where SSH is not available, SOCAT can be used to perform similar functionality. While not as flexible as SSH, SOCAT allows you to forward ports in a much simpler way. One of the disadvantages of using SOCAT is that we need to transfer it to the pivot host, PC1 in our current example, making it more detectable than SSH, but it might be worth a try where no other option is available. The basic syntax to perform port forwarding using SOCAT is much simpler. If we wanted to open port 1234 on a host and forward any connection we receive there to port 4321 on host 1.1.1.1, you would have the following command. The fork option allows SOCAT to fork a new process for each connection received, making it possible to handle multiple connections without closing. If you don't include it, SOCAT will close when the first connection made is finished. Coming back to our example, if we wanted to access port 3389 on the server using PC1 as a pivot as we did with SSH remote port forwarding, we could use the following command. Note that SOCAT can't forward the connection directly to the attacker's machine as SSH did, but will open a port on PC1 that the attacker's machine can then connect to. SOCAT port forwarding 1. As usual, since a port is being opened on the pivot host, we might need to create a firewall rule to allow any connections to that port. If, on the other hand, we'd like to expose port 80 from the attacker's machine so that it is reachable by the server, we only need to adjust the command of it. As a result, PC1 will spawn port 80 and listen for...
What's the difference between those two? See if you can spot the difference. I think it's just the IP, right? And the port you listen on. Alright.
Connections to be forwarded to port 80 on the attacker's machine. SOCAT port forwarding 2. Dynamic port forwarding and SOCs. While single port forwarding works quite well for tasks that require access to specific sockets, there are times when we might need to run scans against many ports of a host, or even many ports across many machines, all through a pivot host. In those cases, dynamic port forwarding allows us to pivot through a host and establish several connections to any IP addresses/ports we want by using a SOCs proxy. Since we don't want to rely on an SSH server existing on the Windows machines in our target network, we will normally use the SSH client to establish a reverse dynamic port forwarding with the following command. In this case, the SSH server will start a SOCs proxy on port 9050, and forward any connection request through the SSH tunnel, where they are finally proxied by the SSH client. The most interesting part is that we can easily use any of our tools through the SOCKS proxy by using proxy chains. To do so, we first need to make sure that proxy chains is correctly configured to point any connection to the same port used by SSH for the SOCKS proxy server. The proxy chains configuration file can be found at /etc/proxychains.conf on your attack box. If we scroll down to the end of the configuration file, we should see a line that indicates the port in use for SOCKS proxying. The default port is 9050, but any port will work as long as it matches the one we used when establishing the SSH tunnel. If we now want to execute any command through the proxy, we can use proxy chains. Note that some software like map might not work well with SOCKS in some circumstances, and might show altered results, so your mileage might vary. Let's get to work. Note, since you will be doing SSH connections from the lab network back to your attacker machine using the tunnel user for this task, we highly encourage you to use the attack box or a VM instead of your actual machine. Instructions have been given on creating a user that won't allow running commands for transferring files via SSH/SCP, so be sure to follow them as provided. It is also recommended to create a strong password for tunnel user and make sure it is a unique and discardable password, not your actual password in this or any other platform. To complete this exercise, you will need to connect to THMJMP2 using the credentials assigned to you in Task 1 from http://distributor.za.tryhackme.com/creds. If you haven't done so yet, click on the link and get credentials now. Once you have your credentials, connect to THMJMP2 via SSH. SSHZA //.
Alright, let's pause right there. So the first thing is, I guess, to create our tunnel user. Why don't we do that? Alright, so it's just add user. I'm hoping it's just add user. Nothing is auto suggesting. Tunnel user sudo add user tunnel user and new password. I got it right the same time. Alright, and let's see. Let's make sure he's there. He is there. Alright, so far so good. We have created our tunnel user. Let me just see where the original instructions for this were. So sometimes when I do these tasks, I watch other YouTubers and see how they go about it. And there was somebody who has much more experience with this sort of thing, and they added this entire thing as a command when I could see that these were, definitely two different commands, or, this was being prompted. And so it was refreshing. It was comforting to see that other people make what I would consider, if I had done it, a boneheaded mistake. But I was also a little taken aback by, my reaction was, my original reaction to seeing him do that was malicious, where, I would want people to be more forgiving of the mistakes I make. So it's kind of a double standard. I think that's just kind of human nature. All right, so let's see, where are we? Let's get to work. We've created tunnel user. Now we have to SSH in with our creds. Are we still in an SSH connection? How do we kill SSH connections? Let's see. How to... We can find the process ID. Which one of these is our ID? If we just kill all the SSHs? I don't know which should. All right. Hopefully we can have two SSH sessions running at the same time. Let's get rid of some of this SSH, and we don't want Abigail. Who do we want? Control X, clear, nano, creds, but we just want the original creds. All right, so we can use, nope, Abigail Cox is not, she's not supposed to be here. Let's get rid of her. No. Can we kill the entire line there? Yes, we can. All right, so we're gonna use Jodie Foster. I hope she's not a tier 2 admin. I don't know if it's gonna make any difference. Control Shift C. I'm learning slowly but surely. And what is our? Let me just look at our. Let's do this. Just to make sure I get this right. Password. Control Shift C. I'm learning. And we're in. All right, so now we want to create this port forwarding stuff here. Our first objective, let's have the robot read this.
/AD username at thmjmp2.za.tryhacken.com. Our first objective will be to connect via RDP to THMIIS. If we try to connect directly from our attacker machine, we will find that port 3389 has been filtered via a firewall and is therefore not available directly. However, the port is up and running but can only be accessed from THMJMP2. By using SOCAT, which is available on c:/tools/SOCAT/ on THMJMP2, we will forward the RDP port to make it available on THMJMP2 to connect from our attacker's machine.
Alright, so this is the easy portion of the task. I don't think we're going to run into any problems with SSH not being enabled on our attack box yet. Where are we going? Tools. SOCAT. Do we have to change any of these parameters here? Note that we can't use, let's have the nice lady.
To do so, we will run SOCAT with the following parameters. Note that we can't use port 3389 for our listener since it is already being used in THMJMP2 for its own RDP service. Feel free to change the listener port 13389 to a different number to avoid clashing with other students. In a typical setup, you'd have to add a firewall rule to allow traffic through the listener port, but THMJMP2 has its firewall disabled for your convenience. Once the listener has been set up, you should be able to connect to THMIIS via RDP from your attacker machine by pivoting through your...
Alright, so it doesn't seem that there's anything we need to change there, other than the listener port. Ooh, can we do Alt-P? We cannot. My new Linux tricks don't work on Windows. All right.
Your SOCAT listener at THMJMP2. Once connected, you should get a flag from T1_Thomas.Moore's desktop on THMIS.
This is very hard to get a grip on all of this. Let's rename this. One or two times. I was about to say, it's hard to get a grip on this stuff just doing this one time through, but this is my second time through, so we don't need to rename this. This is our attack box. All right, so let's review this. Let's look at my notes, because I've kind of distilled some of the steps here. Take these with a grain of salt because I'm new to all this, but SSH into THM jump 2 using creds. Use SOCAT at C tools. This is Obsidian is nuts. Look at that. For some reason, as soon as I click away, it gets rid of the full path. C tools SOCAT for the RDP port from THMIS to make it available on THM jump 2 to connect from our attack box. All right, so we're forwarding the RDP port from THMIS to make it available on THM jump 2, and that way we can connect to it from our attack box. And then we connect to THMIS via RDP from our attack box by pivoting through your SOCAT listener at THM jump 2. So the SOCAT listener is being set up on THM jump 2. Yes, it's listening. Again, next time we're going to have chat break down some of these commands for me so I know exactly which is referencing what and where everything is coming from. All right, I kind of spaced out there for a moment. Let's just get this done, and we'll figure out how to understand it later. Anything to change there? Nope, seems okay. Failed. Why? We didn't change the port. All right. Ooh, I get to use my new commands. Yes, I do. Applying user settings, and we're in. THM, site beyond site. And let's see, let's type that in. Sounds like it's a reference to a movie or something. There we go, and anytime we get a flag... Oh, I just saw that people had tuned in and left just as soon as we got the flag and before the clip. The clips are my favorite part of the live stream. Alright, I think we can just exit out of this. Do we need this for the next task? This is where it gets tricky, and I know that because the title of the next part of the task is called Tunneling Complex Exploits. But I think we can close this out. I don't think we need it. All right. Back to the robot reading.
Tunneling Complex Exploits. The THMDC server is running a vulnerable version of Rigetto HFS.
Oh yeah, no. This is
the
all
problem we
coming back
face
to me.
is that firewall rules restrict access to the vulnerable port so that it can only be viewed from THMJMP2. Furthermore, outbound connections from THMDC are only allowed machines in its local network. making it impossible to receive a reverse shell directly to our attacker's machine. To make things worse, the Rigetto HFS exploit requires the attacker to host an HTTP server to trigger the final payload, but since no outbound connections are allowed to the attacker's...
This is like those scenes in the heist movies where they're like, oh, that doesn't seem so bad, ironically, sarcastically, and then like, oh, that's not all. There's more.
Machine.
Not only that.
We would need to find a way to host a web server in one of the other machines in the same network, which is not at all convenient. We can use port forwarding to overcome all of these problems. First, let's take a look at how the exploit works. First, it will connect to the HFS port, report in Metasploit, to trigger a second connection. This second connection will be made against the attacker's machine on support, where a web server will deliver the final payload. Finally, the attacker's payload will execute and send back a reverse shell to the attacker on port. HFS exploit. With this in mind, we could use SSH to forward some ports from the attacker's machine to THMJMP2, support for the web server and port to receive the reverse shell, and pivot through THMJMP2 to reach port on THMDC. We would need to do 3 port forwards in both directions so that all the exploit's interactions can be proxied through THMJMP2. HFS forwarded exploit. Rigetto HFS will be listening on port 80 on THMDC, so we need to tunnel that port back to our attacker's machine through THMJMP2 using remote port forwarding. Since the attack box has port 80 occupied with another service, we will need to link port 80 on THMDC with some port not currently in use by the attack box. Let's use port 8888. When running SSH in THMJMP2 to forward this port, we would have to add our 8888 thmdc.za.tryhack.com 80 to our command. For support and port, let's choose 2 random ports at will. For demonstrative purposes, we'll set support equals 6666 and port equals 7878, but be sure to use different ports as the lab is shared with other students, so if 2 of you choose the same ports, when trying to forward them, you'll get an error stating that such port is already in use on THMJMP2. To forward such ports from our attacker machine to THMJMP2, we will use local port forwarding by adding L*6666:127.0.0.1:6666 and L*7878:127.0.0.1:7878 to our SSH command. This will bind both ports on THMJMP2 and...
Let me just check something real quick. This option requires us to indicate the local socket used by PC1 to receive connections, *80, and the remote socket to connect from the attacker's PC perspective. I'll have to ask chat. Alright, let's see if I can find where I was previously.
And tunnel any connection back to our attacker machine. Putting the whole command together, we would end up with the following. Note, if you are using the attack box and have joined other network rooms before, be sure to select the IP address assigned to the tunnel interface facing the lateral movement and pivoting network as your attacker_IP, or else...
Let's get that now. I think it's going to be 10.50.46.185. Because that's what has been. Yeah, 46.185. Alright. So hopefully you were all very impressed by the fact that I remembered the IP address for that very long length of time. Since it's last changed, at least. Alright.
Your reverse shells / connections won't work properly. For your convenience, the interface attached to this network is called lateral movement, so you should be able to get the right IP address by running IP add show lateral movement. Once all port forwards are in place, we can start Metasploit and configure the exploit so that the required ports match the ones we have forwarded through THMJMP2. There is a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, no kidding.
The LOST parameter usually serves 2 purposes. It is used as the IP where a listener is bound on the attacker's machine to receive a reverse shell. It is also embedded on the payload so that the victim knows where to connect back when the exploit is triggered. In our specific scenario, since THMDC won't be able to reach us, we need to force the payload to connect back to THMJMP2, but we need the listener to bind to the attacker's machine on 127.0.0.1. To this end, Metasploit provides an optional parameter reverse listener bind address, which can be used to specify the listener's bind address on the attacker's machine separately from the address where the payload will connect back. In our example, we want the reverse shell listener to be bound to 127.0.0.1 on the attacker's machine and the payload to connect back to THMJMP2, as it will be forwarded to the attacker machine through the SSH tunnel. Our exploit must also run a web server to host and send the final payload back to the victim server. We use servhost to indicate the listening address, which in this case is 127.0.0.1, so that the attacker machine binds the web server to localhost. While this might be counterintuitive, as no external host would be able to point to the attacker's machine localhost, the SSH tunnel...
I'm so lost, like, it doesn't... nothing seems counterintuitive because I'm not intuiting anything, not a single thing. There is no intuition here.
will take care of forwarding any connection received on THMJMP2 at support back to the attacker's machine. The RHOSTS is set to point to 127.0.0.1 as the SSH tunnel will forward the requests to THMDC through the SSH tunnel established with THMJMP2. Report is set to 8888, as any connection sent to that port on the attacker machine will be forwarded to port 80 on THMDC. After launching the exploit, you will receive a shell back at the attacker's machine. You will find a...
Alright. Running vulnerable out of Lateral HFS. The problem we face is the firewall rules restrict access to vulnerable ports so that it can only be viewed from THM jump 2. Therefore, outbound connections from THMDC are the only allowed machines in its local network, making it impossible to receive a reverse shell directly to our attacker's machine. To make things worse, the Lateral HFS exploit requires the attacker to host an HTTP server to trigger the final payload. Let me read this again. Furthermore, outbound connections from THMDC are only allowed 4 machines in its local network. All right. So it's a complicated matter made more complicated by the fact that there's some missing words in here, making it impossible to receive a reverse shell. All right. So we have to do 2 things. We have to create a reverse shell, forward all the ports, and also host an HTTP server. And here's the first command we have to create. All right, so we've already created our tunnel user. What we're doing is allowing tunnel user to connect to THM jump 2 and use all its port forwarding goodness. All right, let's get to work. There's a couple of parameters we want to change here, and we can use home. Oh, I think how can I move forward? Alt A? Nope, that's too far forward. What happened? Why did it duplicate everything? All right. I'm just going to use arrows to move forward. 10.50.46.185. I think we leave the 888 alone, right? Let's use port 888.8. And that seems kind of arbitrary. The 80 is not, though. All right. And we don't have to choose those. We don't have to change those. But the ones we do have to change, I didn't mean to jump all the way down there. I wanted to jump to the end here. We do want to change these because it will conflict. It may conflict with other students using this. So let's say 5556. And again, I don't think these ports have to match up, but for ease of use, and we're going to make them match. The ins and outs are going to match. All right, and let's send it. Looks good. Connection refused. All right. So first of all, we're supposed to be sending this from our THM Jump 2 server. That's the first problem we're encountering. The second one, I think we're going to find that SSH is not enabled. Ooh, do I want to... Can I just send this? And I'm kind of frozen here. What's going on? All right, let's create another SSH session into THM Jump 2. Let's just jump out of there. Oh, okay. I guess we don't have to. I don't think we... Does it matter that we're in this directory? I don't think it does. 5556 and 4646, and it looks good. And I think we're going to get connection refused. At least I hope we do. Because that means I have a proper security posture. Let's clear this out for now. All right, how do we... I think it's just start SSH. Let's look at our notes here. New general CLI commands. Sudo... Oh, system control or system CTL. How do you pronounce that? I don't know. Sudo system... Oh, and it auto-suggests it. Great. Now if we run the command, yes. Ooh, do I remember this? Is it going to tell us one way or the other? I was hoping it would give us some sort of indication on whether or not we were successful. But I guess Meterpreter will tell us. All right, MSF console. I don't think it was successful. I think I screwed it up. Let's try sending it again. Let's proceed as per usual and see how far we get. All right. Use Rigetto HFS EXEC set payload Windows shell reverse TCP set lhost thm jump 2.za jump 2.za dot tryhackme.com set reverse listener bind address 127.0.0.1. There's no place like home. Set L ports to, what did we do? 46. Set serve host 127.0.0.1. Set serve port 55. Wait, what was it? Yeah, 5556. Set our hosts 127.0.0.1. Set our ports 8888. Exploit. After launching the exploit, you will receive a shell back at the attacker's machine. Hey, I did. Wow, holy cow. I was not expecting. I thought I'd screwed up my tunnel user's password. All right. Oh, what's the nano version of in Windows? Type is the nano version. Type flag.txt. THM forwarding it all. And what happens when we get a flag?
Hack the planet!
Hack the planet. All right. We're steadily hacking the planet, one task at a time. I should have waited until I submitted it. All right, I'm gonna give myself another hack the planet. All right. So there you have it. That went swimmingly. We ran into very few problems this time around. Well, that's what I said at the start of the stream, right? I said we have created and encountered just about every possible problem that we can have, that we could have. And we've learned from our mistakes, and I think things are getting easier as we go forward. All right. I don't have a robot reading for this, so I'll just read it manually. In this room, we have discussed the many ways an attacker can move around. And holy cow, we're at the end of the room, too. A network only once they have a set of valid credentials. From an attacker's perspective, having as many different techniques as possible to perform lateral movement will always be helpful, as different networks will have various restrictions in place that may or may not block some of the methods. While we have presented the most common techniques in use, remember that anything that allows you to move from one host to another is lateral movement. Depending on the specifics of each network, other paths could be viable. Should you be interested in more tools and techniques, the following resources are available. Sashetto, Repivot, Chisel, hijacking sockets with shadow move. That's interesting. I'm going to add all these to my bookmark. Bookmark tab. Save. Bookmark tab. Save. I think I can just do Control D, right? Save. All right, and those are good. We can read later. All right, click and continue learning. Well, we're not going to continue tonight. Let's see, how long has the stream been going? We've been live for 1 hour and 20 minutes, and we got through 2 tasks, one of which was deemed complex by the very creators of the port forwarding room. and to prove it to you, here we go. Despite that, I think the room is listed as easy, although it took us about a month to complete on and off. Let's see here. Easy, yeah, super easy. The next room is persisting, I believe. Let's see, let's take a look. Let's just do a little preview of what's going on tomorrow night. It'd be good if I was in the search bar there. Let's see, compromising Active Directory. Oh, okay, let's just go here then. What's up next? And keep in mind that I'm not waiting to the weekend because we're so far behind. We're going to be doing this every night until we've completed the compromising Active Directory. What is this called? A module, which is kind of like a subset of a learning path. So up next is exploiting Active Directory, which I thought we'd kind of been doing right along here, but we're going to learn common AD exploitation techniques that can allow you to reach your goal in an AD environment. All right, so that's what's up tomorrow night. That's it for me. Thank you for joining us. Any questions or comments from the chat? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, with that, we're going to go out on a Hackers Unite.
Hackers of the world unite.